Man, we got a big crowd.
This is the largest one I've ever seen.
Standing room only. Wow. Everywhere. Yeah, we have other chairs? I know we got some standers.
Downstairs too, she'll give you some more chairs.
That's impressive.
That's what happened on Saturday.
Impressive.
We drove in.
Big star.
Word gets around.
It does get around. It does get around. So we'll go ahead and kick this thing off, man. I appreciate y'all joining us tonight for one of our seminars that we do here at Lake Fork Marina. Every other Friday, every 2 weeks on Friday. For those of you that are new, a lot of new faces tonight. We do these every 2 weeks on Friday at 6 p.m. Usually we sit around and start late because we're joking about something like we just were. But we have a good time. We talk bass fishing. We talk about what's going on the lakes right now in this area, specifically Lake Fork, more often than not. But we just, if you guys have questions at any time, feel free to just shout them out, raise your hand, however you want to do it. It's a open forum type deal. And we're going to see if we can't help you guys catch more and bigger fish, because that's what we're all about. Right, Dave?
I was on the water today, and I caught some, up to 5 pounds, and on his favorite bait, chatterbait. And so they're out there to be caught, and you just got to have an idea what you're looking for, and then pattern that across the lake.
Yeah, so tonight we don't really have like a general, sometimes we'll go in depth on a technique or whatever. It's not really what we want to do tonight, because things are happening and developing pretty quick on the water. So I want to talk to you guys about what we're seeing on the water and how we're catching them, and what's kind of coming up, what we're going to see over the next few weeks. And we'll go in depth on some stuff, breaking down I'm going to go in depth tonight on the sweet spot within the sweet spot in some of these super shallow areas to the best of my abilities. And but at any time, like I said, if you guys have questions, ask them. We're going to rely on you guys to help us with the seminar tonight, because we want to talk to you guys about what you want to know about. So if y'all have questions about anything at all when it comes to fishing or anything really, according to Saturday night, we can just talk about anything.
And I think where he's headed with this is like what I found today on one spot, and we caught the 3 fish in one spot, was the uniqueness of that spot.
Yep.
And every spot you fish, and you look in, no matter you're in the back of a cove, you're on a main lake point, whatever it is, there's something that's unique about that spot. And a lot of times when you get bit there, so many people, they just don't think twice about it, and they take the fish off, they've drifted off 30, 40 yards off of it, and then they just start throwing again, and they miss the uniqueness of why they caught that fish right there. And it's very important that you look around and say, what's so different about this while you're fighting him? It's not important that you get the fish in the boat. You just hooked one. And look down at your graph, look down at the mapping on the graph, and see what it is. Is it a contour break? Is it the end of a point that's a secondary point, or a little nodule off of a point on a main lake point? There's something that's unique about that spot. Pay more attention to that, and you can pattern that across the lake.
And I would place a bet that there's not one single bass on this lake right now that's by himself. I don't think there's a single bass on this lake that's hanging out by itself right now. I really don't. They are pulling into areas in groups. Everywhere you catch one, there is another one. May not always catch that other one, but they're there. And oftentimes when you catch one, you will catch several. That's very, very common right now. And so what we're in is we are in the absolute peak of pre-spawn from one end of this lake to the other is what's happening. We're in the truest example of pre-spawn mode that you could be. The fish on the early warming areas, the far northern ends, the backs of some of the creeks that warm up quicker, they're in pre-spawn. And I was kind of concerned that maybe it was going to start fading this week, but we had a few cold days that knocked the water temps back down to keep them in pre-spawn, because we had a full moon last night. And at the beginning of the week, I was finding water temps, at 58, 59 degrees. You did as well. Now, that was on Monday and Tuesday. I'm going, man, that water's 60, and we got a full moon in a couple days coming up. If that water temp stays around 58, 60 degrees, and you get a full moon, some fish are good. The areas where that water's the warmest, where it is that temperature, there's going to be some of those fish get on the bed at 58 to 60 degrees with a full moon. And by the way, we still might have a select few, because we just had that full moon, and we got a warm day tomorrow, really warm day tomorrow, and not just a tremendously cold day on Sunday. If that water in some areas does get back up to 58 or 60, there might be a fish or two on a bed by Sunday, Monday. I'm not saying it's something you can go pattern and go run and sight fish all day, not at all. But in the very select few right areas, there might be a few fish on a bed. If you fish here next week and you catch one with bloody tail, Don't say I didn't warn you. Like, it could happen. And I know that seems counterintuitive to a lot of people. Think, well, dude, it's January 29th.
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. Once you've reached the coldest part of the year and that water starts trending back up, when it gets to that magical number of 58 and you get a moon cycle, they're doing it. So, but right now, so you guys that are going out fishing tomorrow, by the way, tomorrow it's going to be really windy, so be thoughtful about where you launch the boat. Be careful about all that. But it should be a really good fishing day tomorrow. Tomorrow should be a good day to go fishing, good day to go catching. This peak of this pre-spawn deal is so special. And even on the lower end of the lake, those fish are in pre-spawn mode as well. And they're starting to pull up on a different type of pre-spawn area, but they're pulling up in groups and feeding the same way. There's really two key types of spots, I guess you would say, areas. Two key pieces of structure that I'm focused on right now. And one is the infamous shell bed. And I'm talking about the shallow ones. Now, when we say shell bed, I always feel like we might be misleading people at times when we start talking about these shell beds. They come in all depths and sizes and varieties of density. When we say shell bed, everybody thinks of the actual shell. What I really would like for you guys to think about and concentrate on when you're thinking of a shell bed is hard spots. And we're talking about shallow hard spots right now because these fish are pulling up on shallow ones and anywhere, depending on the day, from 1 to 2 feet, all the way out to 4, 5, 6 feet, and sometimes they're hanging out off the edge of them at 8 feet. But what you're looking for is shallow points, essentially. That's the best way I can describe it. It's just shallow points. I've been asked this since we've started talking about this pattern the last couple weeks. I've been asked dozens of times, how do you find shell beds? Well, don't think of it as a shell bed. Think of it as a very shallow, long extending point. And the key ones right now for pre-spawn on the southern end of this lake especially are they're right around the mouth of a major creek that a big population of fish will spawn in. A Birch Creek, a Dale Creek, a Williams, a Mustang, all the bigger creek arms where a large amount of fish are going to go in there to spawn. Right now those fish, a lot of them, are at the mouth or around the mouth, either right outside of it or right inside of it, and they're pulling up on these shallow points. So if you've got a shoreline, and I'll draw this out for you, so if you've got a shoreline coming down here, and the shoreline may look like whatever.
So you got a wider pin? I'll use the flat side.
Now he's criticizing my art. If you're going to criticize my drawings, we're going to be...
criticizing, I'm just helping
if I'm going to have to correct my drawings,
the fans here.
We're going to be here all night because I'm going to tell you, these drawings are not going to be great. I'm not an art major, I'm a fishing guy.
We need the fans to see that.
So
line.
if you look at this shoreline, the obvious place that if you're just looking at the bank line as you're fishing, you're going to think the point's right here. Well, you really need to depend on your Navionics, your mapping, whatever mapping system you're using. You really need to rely on those because that's not always where the point's going to be. Now that will have some type of point, but it may be a real short one, right? But over here, anywhere, you can have these little undulations. So let's say this contour line runs out here and then comes way out here. Well, that's obviously going to be a better feeding table for more and bigger fish than this is, correct? Okay. So this is what you're looking for. If you look on your contour map, and a lot of these things you can customize the depth on them on Lowrance and Humminbird now on your mapping system. And if you go and you highlight everything 4 foot and less, 5 foot and less, well, it's going to draw a red line or whatever color you select and fill in that area, and it'll stand out like a sore thumb where these little shallow points are that jump out. So you want to look for the shallow points that extend out into the lake. Pond dams are a favorite of mine, especially if they're located at the mouth of a major creek. You guys heard me earlier talk about I've been starting every day that I've fished Lake Fork for a month now. I've started on Dale Pond Dam. Dale Pond Dam is really close to the mouth of Dale. It's right inside the mouth of Dale. Pond dams are great because pond dams create, when they're in the right depth, some of our pond dams are 20 foot deep. I don't want that one right now. The top of Dale Pond Dam is anywhere from 3 to 5 foot, depending on what section you're on. But if you've got a pond dam, yeah, that's terrible. So that point out of Dale comes out like this, and it runs in here, and then the other side of Dale is over here, right? When it comes up to this pond dam, it comes here, and that pond dam runs like this. And the bank runs here, and then there's that little point that's right there, and then there's a little gap to the main lake right here. So this is that island. This is Dale Island right here. Well, that pond dam comes off here like this and runs over here, and there's another point, and then there's land. And then over here there's land. And this is the Dale Pond in here. And then here's the pond dam. And there's actually,
I was going to say, there's a gap.
there's actually, and what that is, there's a low spot at the corner of the pond dam on this one, particular one. And what that is, that's the old spillway on the pond. So there's actually a really great drain. And there's a shelf, there's a contour line that comes off here and it runs out here. There's like a shelf, and then it tucks in right here and gets tight to the bank. And then the pond dam has a contour line that comes off it and kind of comes out here and does this. And so you got this little drain right here. This whole thing is a shell bed. This thing is a shell bed. And then there's scattered shell in this drain right here, running through here. And then over here on this side, there's a big shell bed. So I love starting on Dale Pond Dam for a big reason. I can fish this entire area and never be in a bad spot right now. If those fish are pulled up on the shell bed and feeding, I can catch them here, here, and here. If they're not pulled up on the shell bed and eating, I can catch them in this drain and this drain, right? And that's what makes it such a dynamic area. And that's why you'll see, and I'm giving away the juice right now, and I got probably a half a dozen fishing guides that are going to be ready to whoop me for this.
Be crowded there in the morning.
Because if you, well, if you
I
pull,
forgot to tell you, y'all are not allowed to fish there.
to heck within the morning, to heck within the morning. If you pull in there on any, especially once we get in late February and throughout the whole month of March, you might see 3 or 4 or 5 fishing guides in here. You'll have a boat set up here,
And I can name them.
you'll have a boat set up here. Sometimes someone set up here. You'll have one over here in this corner, one fishing this. I mean, heck, one day Brian Duplichet was here, and he was the only boat there when I got there because I got there real early. And I pulled in over here to this point because I didn't want to crowd Brian, you know, and the wind was kind of blowing that way anyway. And then McFarland comes here and sets up right here. And I was like, I mean, but and he didn't do anything wrong. He wasn't interfering with us fishing. But normally you would look at 3 boats stacked up right there and go, man, that's ridiculous. But that's like Fork in March. Like, you're going to deal with some of that. But you will see fishing guides all in here. So they're probably all mad at me right now for telling y'all this. But if you want to fish Dale Pond Dam in March, I highly suggest getting up very early. That's all I'll say. There's that one, and there's one more that I can think of that it's really positioned correctly at the mouth of a good spawning area where there's going to be a lot of fish, okay? Just a ton of fish that are coming from here to here and from here to here. This is the main lake. So as these fish come in here and they're following bait around, man, oh golly, look at blood. Look. You push down on it, it gets more ink going, Dave. Look at here. We've just got a mess going tonight. It's just a great stop sign. You know what I mean? The pond dam, it just creates, and there's shell beds scattered all along the pond dam. There's different areas that are more dense than others, but it's just such a great dynamic stop sign. So this is the first thing that I look for, you know, on the main lake. This is the first pattern that I'm concentrating on right now. And guys, there are shallow points like this one here, and this one here, and even the pond in the way it creates it. And there's more shell beds out here on the main lake at the mouth of Dale that you can fish. There's stuff like this all over this lake from one end to the other. I mean, Little Caney probably has 50 of them. You know, literally probably has 50 of them in Little Caney and around the mouth of Little Caney. So if you do pull into one of these and there's several boats on it, don't get discouraged. Just keep looking at your map and find these little contour lines that jut out. And it'll stand out. The first foot or two, if it extends way out, it's going to extend out into 3, 4, 5 most of the time. So, does anybody have any questions on how to locate shell beds? You're just looking for shallow points. It's really, really simple. Now, key component, how to locate active shell beds. Hard to do. In wintertime, cold water right now, fish don't really surface very much at all. So, if there's no bait fish activity on the surface, how do you know which one of these shell beds has life on it? How do you know which one is active, which one the fish are going to be ready to feed on, which one they're staging off the edge of? Because I've been catching a ton of fish now, probably more fish in this than I have on top of the shell beds here lately, in these drains, where these fish are hanging out at 8 to 12 foot of water off the edge of it. And they're hanging out here off the edge of it and out here off the edge of it. And I'm throwing a jerkbait out there and a crankbait that dives about 6 feet that I'm slow rolling and I'm catching them. How do I know which ones these fish are staged around, and at some point will pull up on and feed. That's the active shell bed. The easiest thing is loons. Now, you're not going to see loons on all of them this time. Like right now, they're not on all of them. They're, later in the year, you'll kind of see if there's not a loon there. When we get to March and April, if there's not a loon on one of these shallow shell beds, I don't even want to deal with it. I'll just move to the next one because the loons get so spread out on all of them. But one thing you can do is look at your graph when you're getting near them, okay? Because one thing that I can tell you right now is if a shell bed is an active shell bed or is going to be an active shell bed, there's going to be a lot of life. And I mean, she said this is racist. It don't race very well. There's going to be a lot of life near them, okay? And gizzard shad will pile up around the edge of these things, and off in the little bit deeper water, the 8 foot, whatever, they'll pile up and wait for the time to be right for the wind to blow that plankton and condense that plankton on top of those shallow bars. And that's when the gizzard shad will pull up and get on the shell bed. And that's when the loons will come over there and pick them off, and the bass are up there picking them off on top. But before you see that, if you look at your graph, okay, what you'll see when you normally look for shad, you look for what? A ball. You look for a ball of shad, right? A bait ball. Not right now. There's so many gizzard shad in this lake, and there's so many piling up around these shell beds in these areas that it literally looks like somebody took paint and splattered your graph. Okay, so it'll just be. Let me make a big dot, and then a little bigger dot, and a little bigger dot, and your whole graph will just light up with dots. And you're like, what is all that? And what? That's shad. And it's big individual gizzard shad that you're marking. That's the key. Now, usually, let's say this is, we're going to try and write upside down. I can't even write normal. Does that say 10 or is that backwards? Okay. So let's say this is 10 foot. That's 8 foot. That's 6 foot.
Backwards.
That's 4 foot. That's 2 foot, and that's 0. There will be a zone that they're suspended in that drain most of the time. This is a big tip. This is important. If that zone is 8 foot, you need to fish. A, you need to fish a bait that can get pretty close to 8 foot, at least 6 or 7 foot. B, you need to fish the edges of that shell bed in that depth. Because if they're suspending down, those bigger bass are going to be as deep as the deepest shad most of the time. And they are going, when they pin them up against something to feed on them, they're going to do it in that depth, the bottom of the shad, and work their way up. So you need to really fish to the edges. If they're at 8 foot, you need to fish that shell bed off the side into 8 foot of water. Does that make sense to everybody? Today, they were suspending in 4 foot. So I have a jerk bait that goes down to about 4 to 5 foot and suspends. So guess what I was throwing? A 4 to 5 foot suspending jerk bait. And they look, like this. And the whole graph was just peppered. I mean, all the way to the top. Top to 4 foot, covered in spots, speckles. That's all I can tell you. And you'll even see it when you're trolling around on your front graph on your trolling motor. You'll see them. I mean, they're everywhere. So that's how you identify active shell beds. Just life. And the thing that you have to understand about these shell beds is you may make 40 casts down the edge of a shell bed and not get a bite. And on 41, you'll catch one. And if you catch one, you might catch one on 42, 43, 44, and 45 as well. And you might not. You might catch one on 41 and you might catch one on 61. Avery's been in this scenario on this spot with me. How long do we fish that area before you got that bite?
Almost an hour and a half.
These are spots that if you pull up on and you got a little bit of wind blowing across them and you've got all these signs of life on your electronics, and especially if you're seeing loons come through there, and not just come through there and paddle by you, but if they're coming through there diving, coming up, you need to hang out. Like they're there, you just got to locate them and get one to fire. And once you get one to fire, there's no telling what'll happen. And some days you only get the 1 bite. And some days you get 2, and some days you get 10.
It was quality though.
You never catch, very rare to catch a small one doing that.
It was quality.
Very rare. You know, you do catch some small ones once in a while, but these type of spots out by the main lake with that dynamic structure and that big bait source around it, it's very rare to catch small. I'll tell you a cool one that Aaron got to experience with me earlier this week was on this spot. We were kind of up there and we had been fishing for a while and hadn't gotten a bite, and I was kind of scratching my head like we do. And we kind of gotten a little bit shallower. And I'm just, at this point, I'm just fishing around trying to figure it out. And we'd kind of gotten up shallow on top of one of those shell bed areas, points. And a loon came up probably 15 to 20 feet from our boat, and this loon had a big old shad in his mouth. He's shaking the loon, shaking the shad and trying to get the shad to stop wiggling so he can get it down or whatever. And Aaron throws out there, and we've been fishing there for an hour. And Aaron throws out there not too far past where that loon came up, twitch with a jerk bait, boom, caught one. And that's just proof that those loons and those bass, whenever you see those loons diving on that shad, those bass are sitting right there with them. They're right there with them. It's just, we got to remember, the water still on the main lake's 51. Like, that's cold water for a bass. 51 degree water for a Florida stream bass, that's cold. They're not going to bite all the time in that 51 degree water. The reason that I start every morning on this is because the home run factor is so huge right here. So, are you doing any of that shallow point main lake stuff?
I've been looking shallow, and I was listening to this, and I'm doing totally opposite. I mean, we had 2.5 foot low water here in the past month, before the water came up. And what happened in that 2.5 foot water was what? New vegetation grew. And so that's what I've been scouring.
Oh, I'm doing that too?
Yeah, I've been scouring that and finding new growth of bank grass. And so, like you said, I found 59 degree water a few days ago. And I went today just to go check in some other areas where there should have been warmer water last week or several days ago, 58, 57. The water in there was 52 today. All right, so that shallow where it used to be bank growth grass, and throwing that chatterbait up there in literally 18 inches of water and 5-pounder, and then played around in that area there, played around, and then where it dropped off to where it's in 2-3 foot. Well, I find in this one particular area a little deeper spot that was a little bit of a ditch or a trench, and ended up catching a 2-pounder and a 3-pounder in that trench, and it didn't run more than 50 yards. And so those fish were relating, so they were probably up in that bank grass at one point in time. But what I've found over time with moving baits like that, especially in the wintertime, is it's always an afternoon deal with a moving bait. Harder to catch. That's why I asked him when he said they caught some fish on chatterbait early, and I was like, really? Because most of the time I spend my times out in 25 to 35 foot until 2 o'clock.
Yeah, we've caught some early, but it definitely gets better.
It gets better
from noon
late
on
in the day.
Yeah.
So I'm out looking. Now we don't catch a ton of bigger ones out in say 22 to 35 foot, but we do get bit. And so that'll ease the pain until we get to prime time, which really for me is 2 o'clock till 6 o'clock. And that's when we can get them to hit a moving bait of some sort, whether it be a trap, whether it be a chatterbait, swim jig. How many of you throw a swim jig? That is a bad to the bone bait, especially when the water gets in the 53, 55, 56 degree range. Ooh, it's good bait, really good bait. So,
what do you put on the back of your swim jig? Because
I use Rage, Baby Rage. I'll start off with a 1/4 ounce or a 3/8, and I'll put a Baby Rage crawl on the back of it.
So you use a crawl bait?
Crawl bait.
Because there's two deals in swim baits. Some guys use crawls, and not as many, but some guys use swim baits. I tend to like to use swim
I
baits.
want a lot of kick and cold water. I want something that's going to hit hard. That's why I use Rage baits. They hit insanely hard. Now, when it gets up to 60 degrees or 58 degrees, then I'll put, like he's talking about, a paddle tail has a little bit different wiggle to it, and so then I'll put a paddle tail on a swim jig, and then I'll have one with the Rage tails on the back also. So I'll have 2 of them tied on the deck.
For the record, I'm going to look like a Smurf by the time this night's over.
He's got blue fingers.
Are you doing anything on secondary points, or is everything main lake?
Secondary points would kind of qualify is what kind of some of the stuff I'm talking about, because some of these shell bed areas are on the outside, are on the main lake. I'm saying main lake, and I'm referring to main lake oriented, because a lot of these, like that one in Dale, it's inside the creek. I mean, that point that sticks off the side of the pond dam over there pointing out towards the middle of the creek, that's a secondary point, technically.
See
And
a boat on it when we came in.
what's that?
See a boat on it when we were coming in.
When we were coming in,
Yeah,
me and you.
yeah.
When did we come in?
When we were driving down the road.
Oh, you can't see. It's in Dale Creek. You can't see that one.
What creek is that on this side?
Well, there's two. There's three. There's Mustang, Little Mustang, and Williams.
We talking about it got bridges on them?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
that
that's-
was Williams.
Yeah, the first one was Williams. Yeah, I didn't pay attention to the boats. You be honest with you, I drive over that bridge so many times. I don't notice.
The bridge.
Yeah,
But
it's
to
just
answer
part of the
your
road.
question, I mean, what he's alluding to, you could probably right now at this water temperature just make your living just fishing nothing but secondary points.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is a lot, and probably more than most of the shallow points that I'm referring to are actually inside the creeks. They're just not very far inside the creeks yet. For me, for these bigger creeks, they're kind of out towards the main lake. They're main lake oriented. They're close to the main lake. They're just coming in. They're fresh, all that good stuff. No. So they are secondary points, a lot of them, but they're very close to the main lake.
Yeah, but a jerk bait, square bill, stuff like that. Just
And the
run.
square bill I'm using is that flat-sided square bill.
Yeah,
I-
because it has a tighter wall.
Tighter wiggle. And
Absolutely.
it gets a little bit deeper when those fish drop down, and it does have a tighter wiggle.
Yeah, so if you're just scrambling for something, can't figure something out, just go with that, and you don't have to go all the way to the backs of the creeks. Now, I have a different methodology. I'm going to the backs of the creeks because I have a tournament here in 2 weeks where I'm looking for big unders. And so he and I vary a lot in the way we think about this lake. I do fish for the big fish also, but I also fish for big unders. And I go hunt for those things, and I know where to hunt for them.
So
And today there was one that was a 2.5 pounder that was 15 and a quarter. So
that's a fat fish.
that's what we're looking for.
That sucker eats the same thing I eat.
That's what we're
A
looking
bag
for.
full of these.
He's on my diet. Yeah.
But
Yeah,
those
that's
are the
right.
type of things, and so when I'm looking for those type of fish, that's the type of place I'm going to go all the way back. If I want to catch a bigger slot fish or a something that's going to register the scale a little bit, then I'm going to be further up towards the mouth. Really, sometimes not any further than halfway back on the secondary points, throwing either a jerkbait, a square bill, or a jig.
Yeah. Well, when we started this deal, I said there's two patterns that I'm using right now. And there's two different groups of fish. And the first one was the first one that we just talked about, the
Shellbed.
main lake shellbed stuff. The second one, and what I actually spend more of my day on, and I'm going to go into a lot of detail on this, and you kick in wherever you feel like, but I'm going to tell you, my methodology on this, my ideology, like how I do this and how I go about this, is pretty different than anybody else that I know, that I personally know of.
Because he stands on his head and casts.
I can't even hardly stand on my feet and cast. I don't know what you're talking about. Like, I wish I was that athletic. I appreciate the compliment, sir. There's no such thing as too shallow in January and February on Lake Fork.
Especially in the afternoon.
There's no such thing as too shallow.
Especially when it's sun shining.
Yes. Once that water temperature bottoms out, and what I mean by bottom out is it cools off as we go through December, January, it cools off. The first time that water temperature starts to do this, which it has for the last 10 days or so now, the first time it starts to trend back up, the warmest water on the lake is the shallowest water. And the warmest of the shallow water is going to be where there's more shallow water. So if I've got a creek that's the size of this hat, and from the button to the back of the creek is 1 foot of water, and then I got another creek, and from the brim to the back of this hat is 1 foot of water. The brim to the back is less total water volume in that creek. Does that make sense? So this has everything from the button to the brim is deeper than 1 foot, so there's more water volume. So the less water volume you have, the faster it will warm up. Okay? So I'm looking for the areas that get shallow way out there, and I'm going all the way. Like I'm in a foot of water for hundreds of yards at times,
That's right.
idling, whatever. Now, that will have a drain, a creek channel, multiple drains, whatever in it. The best ones have the best creek channels. They have that broad expanse of super shallow water that warms up really quick, but they have that depth change that those fish can pull into on a cold night like the last couple ones. pull into that little bit deeper drain. And that's all they'll do, guys, because these fish are moving into that warm water back there, getting ready to spawn. And once they move in, their instincts won't let them go back to the main lake. So no matter what it does cooling off wise, those fish aren't leaving. They will simply suck down to the most convenient, slightly deeper water near them, the first drop around them. And oftentimes that will be a secondary drain, just a ditch that runs into the main creek at some point, but in the back it's just a ditch. You will find a lot of fish. And David's talking about tournament unders, but I'm gonna tell you guys something. I've caught some of the biggest fish of the year, some of my best 5 bags of the year, every single year in January and February in that much water. You know, I've caught a lot of really big fish. And there's something about that first wave of fish that spawns just tends to hold a lot of big ones. I think everybody kind of agrees on that, you know. That first wave of fish that spawns tends to hold some bigger fish. Well,
And there's not many of them.
that first wave of fish that spawns is going to be the ones that are the furthest back right now in pre-spawn. So I've lived on that every January and February for years now, and it's worked extremely well for me. The last big guides tournament we had, I caught 30 pounds on the first Saturday in February. We had a warming trend going into the day before. We had a big warming trend. It was warm the morning we started, and an hour into the tournament, it went from 65 degrees to 35 degrees in 5 minutes. So we had one of the hardest cold fronts, fastest cold fronts. I mean, we're fishing, south winds blowing, it's 65 degrees, wearing hoodies. Feels great. All of a sudden, the wind turns out of the north, and within 5 minutes, we're freezing, we're putting on as much clothes as we got, and the north wind is blowing 30 miles an hour.
And it was so foggy you couldn't see the back of the boat.
It was so foggy you couldn't see the back of the boat, and when it turned out of the north and that north wind started blowing, the fog disappeared in 5 minutes. I mean, it was one of the craziest weather changes I've ever seen. So the majority of that tournament day, we were fishing in cold front conditions, water cooling, all that stuff, right? Didn't matter because I'd been catching those fish in those shallow flats, and I knew where every drain in that area was. And instead of throwing up on the flat, we just threw down the drain, and we still caught them. Caught them all day. Had 30 pounds on our best 5 bag that day.
You still throw reactions when they're hunted down in the drains?
I like the reaction baits better. Now, if I get a total post-frontal day, calm, kind of like today, it wasn't real windy today, especially when you got if I'm in an area in those backwaters where it's really calm, it's really sunny, then I will take a black and blue Senko and put it in that drain. If I just can't get them to bite the chatterbait, can't get them to bite the trap, I'll take a black and blue Senko and put it in that drain on those really calm, sunny days on cooling trends after they've moved back. And they've moved back. They've moved back, guys. With that 58, 59 degrees in those shallow areas. Now, we're saying 58, 59. Keep in mind, the main lake ain't got above 51, 52 on any day. So it's only parts of the lake that are that warm. And that's why there's no such thing as too shallow, because the best, warmest water that those bait fish are going to flock to and that those fish are going to pile into and through those drains and go back there and feed on those bait fish and get ready to spawn is the shallowest water you can find. I mean, I caught a 7 to 8 pounder this week, and I don't know how her fin wasn't sticking out of the water. Like, she was in not a foot. She was in inches of water, less than a foot, 10, 11 inches. I mean, big fish, really, really shallow. So that's kind of the general knowledge of that, is you got to find the biggest expanses of the shallowest water, the less water volume, the warmer it'll get. And you've got to really pay attention, again, to your electronics when you're fishing those areas and look for those pockets of warmer water within that. Wherever the water's the warmest, that's where they're going to be. And if you can have some grass there, you don't necessarily have to have grass for this deal, but if you do have grass in one of those warming areas, it makes it that much better. Because wherever there's a patch of grass, there's going to be fish when they're on that deal, because it's just the best cover they got in this much water. One thing that we deal with this time of year is dirty water. We get rains, we get fronts, we get hard rains. Last Sunday night going into Monday morning, it rained as hard as I've ever seen it rain around here.
And
it dumped.
All those ones I caught today were all in the dirtiest water.
Yeah.
Using a chartreuse and white chatterbait. They were in the dirtiest water.
So you're going to deal with dirty water. You're going to fish in dirty water. And that's part of why chatterbait shines. That's part of why those bright orangish lipless crankbaits shine. Spinnerbaits are really good.
I did just buy a Fire Tiger spinnerbait too,
Big,
with a thumper blade
yeah,
on it,
big.
'cause I think it'll work.
That's the other thing about spinnerbaits this time of year is the bigger the blade, the better. The vibration is key, and a lot of that has to do with dirty water. But There's top secret that I've never talked about ever on any camera. Nothing.
Wait, tell me off to the side first. You don't.
You don't want me to tell them?
What?
You want first
You're supposed
dibs?
to tell me first.
I don't like you as much as I like him. I'm just kidding, Dave. You're my guy, and you know you're my guy. So, when these creeks flow like they did, what was weird was Monday, I came out here Monday.